Nesting activity is also studied. Dr. Hill has observed that the larger the population, the less care a mother gives to her nest and young. The same type of individuals that resulted in the mouse utopia are also emerging in the rat population. There are aggressives, asocials, and outcasts. Though these studies use animals, the findings about population growth and individual behavior are being closely compared to our own human population. Like all populations that have existed on this planet, many researchers believe that the human race has reached a crucial point in the exploit phase, a point where important decisions must be made and careful planning implemented if we are to survive. The study of plant and animal populations.
Hey, my more brothers, back again. And I just want to do a quick response to a couple of videos. One was done by Sister George and Concrete Rose, the breakdown. The original video was called An Asexual Revolution. We talk about how women are not basically having sex or having relations with men and how that affects men, right? In other words, men and women are starting to go asexual. And as always, we black people think that we live in a bubble and it's something that only affects black people, so only black people can fix it. And it's only partially true. And the second video was the response to that, which was done by Mr. Z. And also talked about the decisions made, but he went a little further. He talked about the environment and the electronic environment that we live in. The cell phones, the internet, how this is called a delayed maturity in not only men, but also women. We talked about how women are getting to be 37, 38, 39, 40 years old and never having a real relationship in their whole entire life. So they're getting to be middle age and never really having a deep, serious relationship with a man. And you see the same thing on the other side with men. You know, men never really having a deep relationship with the women, men withdrawing from the women, you know, becoming asexual and even voluntarily celibate. Young men talking about sleeping with sex dolls or advanced sex dolls, just so they don't have to be in a relationship with a woman and all that other messy stuff, right? And while all that is true, and we've talked about it, I've talked about it as nauseam. In fact, I went back and forth with a 21-year-old who goes to Howard by the name of Hammer. And he advocates for sex dolls and the Stepford wife plan, where you're not having an actual whole human being. What you're having is a compliant sex doll wrapped in human flesh that will do your bidding. And all that is true. You know, you look at the internet, you look at the way kids are raised, you look at the delayed maturity, the way that boomers decided to raise the millennials and how to not put them under stress. And there was always the same thing. I don't want my kids to go through the same thing I went through. So there's no fire or heat put to the metal to harden it. All of that is true. But they're missing one component, and it's something that I've talked about and the nameless protagonist has talked about. And that goes back to James Calhoun's Mouse Utopia, the Universe 25. He ran this experiment 25 times with rats and mice. And upon the fourth demographic wave, which is equivalent to our post-industrial society, you had a decline. And after the decline, you had a die-off in population. And he named this the behavioral sink. In other words, whatever reason, he could never really explain it. The mice had plenty of protection, they had plenty of food, they had everything except space. Everything except space. All the food, all the water, no predators, nothing, heat, temperature controlled, nothing except luxury, as far as mice are concerned. The only thing you couldn't have was space to yourself. So as the population grew, there's less and less space. And that is to replicate the urban environment of people. And after the fourth demographic shift, we had a decline. So this Mouse Utopia chart actually lines up exactly, almost precisely with the demographic stage, right? The four demographic stages: agrarian or pre-industrial, developing, industrialized, and then what we have is post-industrial. Now with the post-industrial, you get a die-off. Okay, you should get a die-off. And if you look at all the post-industrial countries or societies around the world that are post-industrial, they're all below replacement rates. It's a phenomenon in nature. It seems to be, because it seems so consistent. So is it dating and mating? Yes. Is it the way that the children are socialized? Yes. Is it the environment that they're in? Most definitely. I always say environment trumps culture. Now, culture can shape the environment and make it more conducive, but ultimately the environment that you're in, social, physical environment that you're in, will shape your culture. And culture shapes behavior. And according to Calhoun, this is what we're getting. We're getting the precise, what we call a behavioral sync. According to Calhoun, there's very little way out of it. Once the process starts, there's very little way out of it. We call it the great, after COVID, where the kids are leaving their jobs or leaving their careers and moving out, trying to find themselves. We call it the great resignation. In China, they call it laying flat, where millennials and Zs are doing just enough to eat, just enough to clothe themselves, just enough to shelter themselves, just enough to eat. That's all their work. There's no ambition. There's no hope for the future. They don't care about dating or having sex or having families. All they care about is existing in the moment. We've been seeing that with the rice eaters. We call it the Kigoshimori, the grass eaters, where they're also doing their equivalent of laying flat, where they don't leave the house, they work minimum wage, they don't have a girlfriend, they don't have a family, they're not looking to get married, and these people's in their 30s and 40s. Korea, the same thing. You're starting to see the same thing in Korea. The Korean fertility rate went from 6.5 in 1960 down to below 1. Even the women will not replace themselves. That's how far that the fertility rate has sunk. You have radical feminism going on in Korea as we speak. Women are refusing to marry. Women are refusing to get together and have families. And the men are just letting them go. We don't care anymore. So we started to see it with the women first. They always blame the men. Started to see it with the women first. When they separate, they don't want to perpetuate the species anymore. They really don't want to have kids. They really don't want to get married. They want to work their job and have what they call peace to themselves. The next generation, the men are going to follow. So we've gone from having families, getting together, having gender roles that nurture families and perpetuates the species, down to random hookups and partners. It is what it is. So we think it's this central defect in black people. No, we're just the canaries in the coal mine. Canaries always get the gas first. We always have. We're the ones that when they gave our women welfare, they bounced. You were 90% married in the 1950s. In the 1960s, they allowed black women to have AFDC and on a federal level. We've never seen the level of marriage since. We've never seen that low of out-of-wedlock birth rate since. And now everybody else is coming right behind us. Look at the Latinas. Latinas' out-of-wedlock birth rate is 65%, only 5 to 6 points behind ours. And look at the white community. Since 1960, when the out-of-wedlock birth rate was 1970, when the out-of-wedlock birth rate was 3%, 50 years. It's up tenfold. It's like the mid-30s and rising fast. And the only reason it's not more is because there's more of them. And I always say the highest out-of-wedlock birth rate in the world is not Black America. It's actually Colombia at 85%. Black America would not be in the top 3. Good old patriarchal South Africa. Single mother rate is in the 50s. As they industrialize, as you go urban and post-industrial, this is the pattern. Now, while I agree with Sister George and Concrete Rose and also Mr. Z in their assessment, it just doesn't go far enough. And I think us in the Black Manosphere, we have a tradition of going deeper than the surface and instead of the surface talking points. So if we're going to talk about this, we're going to bring up the asexual revolution. Let's look at it for what it is. And it's not just a black thing. If we're going to correct it, we're going to fix it. We're going to kind of slow down the progress of this behavioral sink, as Calhoun would call it, and lessen the effects. We're going to have to understand it. And this is just my 2 cents. But with that, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I am going to see you guys later. Peace.